All right, welcome back to Roompact's ResEd Chat. My name is Paul Brown, and I am your host today. I haven't hosted in a while, so please give me a little grace as I take some of the rust off, or the rest of our team have been taking a lot of these. But we're here to highlight great people doing great work, particularly in res ed and residence life environments. So I'm really excited today because we have one of our Roompact Fellows for this year joining us. For those of you not familiar with Roompact Fellows, they are our scholar in residence type positions. They work with us for a year. They share their knowledge, do some of our webinars, contribute to our blog, things like that. So, my guest today, Erin Long, this is not the first and only time that you will hear from her, not just in our context, but in general. But she's going to share a lot of her thinking, and specifically, we're going to talk a little bit about what her dissertation work was on, which I'm really excited about. But if you do not know Erin, I'm going to do a brief introduction, Erin, but I'm going to let you also introduce yourself. You can give your more formal version, but I'm going to say I've known Erin for years, primarily through the Institute on the Curricular Approach. And that's how we first kind of connected. But one thing I love about Erin is she's just a really deep, thoughtful thinker in terms of how do we design things that are intentional and what does that look like? And I think of the many professionals I know, it's probably one of the things that is your strength and you do best. Is if I need someone to kind of help me think through something and think through it really thoughtfully, like what are our goals here and how can we do it in a meaningful way? Erin Long's the person I turn to. So let's turn it over to you, Erin Long. Tell us about yourself.
Well, thank you so much for that intro. Yeah, so I have been working or had worked in housing and residence life for, well, I don't really like to count up the years, but there were a lot of them, and worked at a lot of
Same.
different institutions. So I've done really small private institutions. I started at Presbyterian College in South Carolina. And then I've done huge institutions. My last housing job was at the University of Texas at Austin. So that's kind of the breadth of the experience I have in housing. I currently actually work in volunteerism and service learning, which has been a really exciting shift for me. But I had just finished my dissertation in December, just graduated, and I'm very excited to kind of share it beyond the four people who are legally obligated to read it. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I mean, a through thread, even though you don't work in residence life and housing right now, is always that student learning portion,
Hmm.
right? Like certainly in your job, you work with applied learning and things like that. That's also
Yeah.
what your dissertation's about.
Yeah.
I think that's really kind of like a through thread through kind of
Mhm.
everything that you do. You also have a deep background though too in design thinking. Is that
Hmm.
right? Like
Yeah.
you were on our podcast actually previously to talk about
Yes.
this a little while ago.
Yeah, a few years ago, I did a podcast on design thinking. I started getting into design thinking actually when I got to University of Texas. So probably about 6 years ago. I just find it absolutely fascinating to try and get into the mindset of whomever you're designing for and being like, okay, what do I want? What is a good experience for the end user, or in our case, usually the student? How are we connecting to them? And so I've done a couple of different like certificate courses through the Luma Institute, which is in Pennsylvania. They do online courses, and that has been really helpful. But I just do a lot of reading on it. I took like a class here at University of Texas on it. Took in my doctoral program, I took a class on um, that as well. And so it's just kind of been this recent through line that I find really helpful, as well as interesting, because I think it helps us get out of like this perspective of what's best for us as educators and administrators and what into what is best for the students and are they going to connect the material the best.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. I mean, it resonates with me. Sometimes I think I'm like, I should really focus in on being more knowledgeable and digging into that literature because every time I encounter it, I think, oh, yeah, maybe I kind of already do that.
Mhm.
Or, there's a part of me that's like, no, this completely is, synonymous, germane with what I do anyway, like, and if I
Mhm.
just put a little extra effort into kind of digging into it, it really help with my work and my thinking and the way that I put things together. So, That's why I love when you talk about it and you infuse it in your work, which it will show up in your dissertation. I
Yeah.
do know that, having read it
Yes.
here. Um, but for those of you who missed Erin's previous episode, I'll put it in the show notes. So if you want to watch that and do a deeper dive on the design thinking,
Mhm.
I'll include that for everyone. But let's talk about this dissertation. So there's quite a few people that have done residential curriculum, curricular
Mhm.
approach dissertations.
Mhm.
Different vantage points on it. You took a very student-centered vantage
Mhm.
point on it. What are the students getting out of it? Other people have focused on like systems, like how's the
Mhm.
system foster this or not, and things like that. Can you tell us a little bit about like where did this come from? What was it?
Yeah.
Usually for most people that write a dissertation, they're like, I was thinking one day this, or this is what happened to me, and
Mhm.
that's where it came from. Like, what motivated your dissertation here?
So I think there's two main things that really kind of were the spark of it. The first is the design thinking, because right around the
Yeah.
time that I was like starting my doctoral program, I was also starting learning about design thinking, and so that was kind of already in the background and sort of percolating. Or as I had a professor who said, "You don't procrastinate, you incubate," and so that it was incubating in my head just then. Um, and
I'm
then
using that.
the second thing that happened was in my previous job, I did our big yearly survey. I was the one who was in charge of writing it and putting it together and sending it out and all the things. And I had one question in it that was name one skill you've learned while living in the residence halls. And I got tons of great answers, especially around communication and conflict management. I got some that were like, I learned laundry, which, yay, we need to know how to do laundry. So good for you. And then every year I would get one or two that were like, I didn't learn anything. Like, I don't know why you guys think that we would learn in the residence hall. Like, it's just a place where I lay my head. And so that got me really thinking, like, what do you consider learning? Like, what as a student do you think learning is?
Mhm.
Um, and it's interesting, you characterized my dissertation as a curricular dissertation, and it is in there, but that wasn't the impetus. Like
Yeah,
it, I was just that was the site I used was a curricular site. And like the fact that there was the focus on learning made it a lot easier to do the dissertation, but that wasn't the actual point.
explicit.
I didn't set out to write a dissertation on a curriculum. It
It
just
just
kind of
happened to
happened.
be the vehicle that was there at the
Yeah.
institution that you did the study.
Yes.
Um, which I mean, and that's one of the things I actually really liked about it because as I was writing it, I think I went in with the idea of like, oh, this is going to be about
Mhm.
curriculum. And then when I was reading it, I was like, oh, like it is, but it's more about how do students understand what co-curricular learning is? How do
Mhm.
students understand learning writ large in like what student affairs people would be like, oh, well, this is obvious. This is where learning occurs. But like, how do students experience that, make sense
Mhm.
of that, construct that? What do they see as valuable? What do they not see as valuable? How do we, how could, the implications for how do we make it a space where that can occur, could
Mhm.
occur whether you have a quote unquote formal curriculum or not, right?
Right. Right. And I also didn't limit it. And this was a very conscious choice that my committee questioned me on multiple times was I didn't limit it to learning in the residence hall because
Yeah.
that wasn't to me the point, wasn't the location. It was
Uh-huh.
just that it was outside of the curricular sphere. And
Yep.
like, what do they think that is? And so, I would get answers from my students or they would tell me about their experiences, yes, in the residence hall, but also with sororities or with other clubs and organizations. They would tell me about their research that happened outside of class. And so there was like a lot of great answers that I got from the students that had nothing to do with residence halls. And,
Mm,
Paul, we've both been housing professionals for many years, and we get into this like mindset of like housing is the only thing. Like, I feel
sure.
like housing silos itself in this way that is really interesting. Like, we kind of think we're ourselves experts on everything, and that's not the case. And so we forget that there's these things outside of it. And so I was very intentional to look at all of their co-curricular experiences, or as many things as they could tell me that they experienced co-curricular. Yeah.
I don't want to go too far, stray too far in this direction, but you did make me think of something kind of here in the moment when you were talking about that. And I feel like other student affairs departments, like let's take student activities.
Hmm.
Um, I f- I feel like students would say, "Oh yeah, I learned stuff in student activities," because they
Hmm.
can rely on leadership,
Hmm.
concepts of it's a very clear skill, leadership
Hmm.
that you would
Yeah.
presumably get in those spaces, amongst other things, but like
Hmm.
leadership. But like when you're in the residence hall and you're living there, I don't know what our clear skill is. Like we might say
Right.
something like, living with others and conflict resolution and things like that. But you don't have a lot of students going, man, I'm really excited to learn about conflict resolution and things like that. But if you say leadership, they immediately can latch on, they
Right.
can make sense of it very quickly.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's marketing. I don't know if it's like, do you know what I'm talking about? Like, does this
Yeah.
make sense?
It absolutely makes sense. Like it's this, so just to give like a pretty ubiquitous example of like roommate agreements. Roommate agreements, I think, are an amazing tool to learn about like how to clarify expectations, how to prevent conflicts, all these kinds of things. But we don't set them up as that. We don't
Yeah,
say this is what this is for. We say, hey, this is so, like we might say like this is an expect like to set expectations, but we don't set it up as a learning experience. And so I think one of the things that I don't know that I was super explicit about because the goal of the dissertation was yes to kind of find something that people could do, like a practical skill, because I just don't like research that doesn't go back to the practical, but I didn't test anything. I didn't test like if we went out and were much more explicit with our roommate agreements and talked about the learning with it, if that would help them learn more.
right.
Um, but we don't set the residence hall up very well. Even, I mean, and maybe some people are doing it really great. I did not feel like I, at that point, was doing it as well as I probably could have. But we don't set that environment up nearly as much as this place of learning. And we don't set I think we could do a better job of setting up our RAs so they could explain the learning that happens to others. Like I think RAs know that they learn during it. And like, especially in a curricular school, you're talking a lot about how this is a learning experience and all these things that students are going to learn from. Um, but I think we more talk at them than really get them to engage with
Mm,
that sometimes. And again, maybe another school is doing it amazingly, and I would love to hear from y'all about how you're setting that up. Um, but like where I am now in volunteerism and service learning, it's in the title, right? Like
right.
we talk about
That
this
is
is
what you
service.
do.
Right, right. Um, and like we also have a department here called Texas Lead. They're really explicit about their teaching leadership skills, like you were saying. Whereas the residence hall, that's not, I think, the expectation students go into living in the
Mhm.
residence hall for. They are expecting hopefully community, and they're expecting like this is going to be a really interesting situation, and like, whatever building they might be in, and so they're like this is my new home in a lot of ways, but they're not expecting it to be a place of learning. And I think we could do a better job of really being explicit about that.
I don't
I,
remember, but I said I wasn't going to go too far down this path, and then I am. I don't remember living learning communities.
yes.
Would that make a difference? Meaning, oh, well, I'm in a living learning community. I mean, it's in the title, living learning.
Right.
That, because one of the findings in here was like students struggled with like, what is this co-curricular learning thing that you're talking about? And maybe
Yeah.
they could articulate those things, but they wouldn't use that label and they didn't
Oh
know
no.
what that word meant.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering if, like, when we have living learning communities in the halls, if that gives the structure, if that gives the
Mhm.
marketing, if that gives the license to be like, oh, you mean like my living learning community where I this, and this. But when
Mhm.
you absent that, that doesn't have that structure.
Yeah.
Like, did that show up at all, or does that just resonate, or am I completely off in a different direction?
It did show up a little. We had one participant who was in a living learning community, and he it was interesting. He was a transfer student, and so he had already lived in the residence halls and like talked about things he had learned before he even came to the institution of the site institution. Um, but he did go into that a little bit. I think he talked a lot more about the community that happened because of it than the learning that happened because of it. And
Yeah.
those two things are like kind of hard to tease out, anyways. Um, but yeah, I think that does help a little bit. But I do wonder because, and again, this might be institution specific. I think a lot of times we talk about living learning communities less in the learning and more in the community. Like this is a
Mm,
community of people that you can, who have similar interests to you. And we focus sometimes a little bit more on that than we do like the learning aspect of it.
yeah.
And also, my site institution, most of their living learning communities didn't have a class connected to it. So it was much more like a little more towards theme communities than
Right.
a living learning community. So yeah, and I think that's one part of the study that was kind of like it could have been better if I had had more sites or different types of institutions. Like that was one of the
Limitations.
drawbacks to it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. Because I think, I went to a public liberal arts college, and when I was a first year student, I took a first year seminar, a one credit seminar,
Yeah.
that was the physics of Star Trek with a math professor, and we read the book, The Physics of Star Trek. It was cool because she would come in and it would try to explain like how would a
Yeah.
transporter work? How would phasers work? But it was really just the vehicle for them
Hmm.
to check in on, hey, you're going to register for classes for the first time. And that was the fun piece, but we would also like go to her house for dinner, or like I think there was a Star Trek movie that came out during the course of that, and so we went as a group, like, and it
Right.
wasn't residence hall based, but it was, I would definitely say I was learning things in there because it had that class piece. And if it was in a residence hall, that blending made
Hmm.
a lot of sense to me. So I would probably attribute, yeah, like this program
Yeah.
experience, especially if it was tied to residence hall would.
So this is a little off topic, but I think it's really funny. It's my
Sure.
freshman year, and this was not my freshman seminar. I had one of those, but I took a class my freshman year that I got science credit for that was called Vision, Reality, and Beyond. And
Oh,
the
okay.
class was literally we read the 2001 Space Odyssey series and talked like did what you did and talked about like what they considered or the technologies that they talked about, both real and imagined and how they would work in a scientific thing. And that was one of my favorite classes, and I'm still so,
Yeah.
so excited I got
I
science
love those
credit for
classes.
that.
I majored in those classes. I also took the history of mysticism and the occult.
Oh,
Fantastic.
that sounds fascinating. I would totally take that class.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, well, another thing that showed up, and this has actually been what I've been thinking about lately, a
Hmm.
lot, is the community belonging piece as kind of a prerequisite
Hmm.
for learning. And
Yes.
that showed up in with your participants a lot. Can you tell people a little bit about that? Because I feel like sometimes, since there was a curriculum approach in place at your site institution, some people are like, "Oh, we don't do curriculum. We focus on belonging." And I'm like,
Hmm.
"Why aren't you focusing on both?" Like, and I
Hmm.
feel like some people set this up as like you either do one or the other. And I'm just
Right.
like, that doesn't make sense to me. Like,
No.
you you can't.
Yeah. And so I had multiple participants who really talked about their RAs and specifically either said they didn't go to things because they didn't know their RA. Like, one of my
Mm,
participants, I think it was Karina, she talked about my RAs only talked to me once, and that was to tell me that my boyfriend couldn't be in the hall without me, and that's the only time I've talked to her. And so I don't go to anything because I don't know her. I
that
don't know people
experience.
on the floor. I have other friends. And then I had another student, I think it was Grace, another participant, Grace, who talked about, she really talked about a specific thing where she went to a program that taught ASL and like really excited about just like these like intro ASL kind of things that she learned and she was like, I went because I was friends with my RA and I love my RAs and they talk to me every time I pass them in the hall and they always want to know how we're doing and like they're my friends. And so that was really in there. as this like piece of the puzzle of like those who felt closer to their RAs definitely ended up going to things more or were more involved within the residence hall. And people who didn't have that connection didn't go to events. And I feel like that's something that like kind of has always been, at least the thing I've told my RAs is always, if you are, it's kind of been anecdotal a lot.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think that that definitely showed up in the dissertation. I think the other thing that showed up that was really interesting, and this was it was because I asked about, we did a lot of bulletin boards, and so we asked specifically some of the people like, did you look at the bulletin boards? And we had one student, Estella, who loved the bulletin boards, would literally go out of her way to go look at them. And telling me, like, remembered specific bulletin boards from like the previous,
Wow.
yeah. And like the skills that she learned from it, she learned time management skills from it and like was telling me all about it. And I was like, okay.
You're
Because
like a residence life professional's dream.
right. And I specifically told her, I was like, you need to tell your RAs that. I was like, they spend so much time on those bulletin
Yeah.
boards and don't always feel like they're appreciated. You need to tell your RA that. And I don't know if she did or not. Um, but that was like a really cool moment for me as a housing professional, be like, oh, this thing I've been telling them to do, like actually worked. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I wanted to bring that up in part, the bulletin board piece. But there's a few other ones related to that that I wanted to bring up, but I wanted to bring up that one because, um, you know, some institutions aren't even doing them anymore, or
Hmm.
they're replaced with electronic signage. And it's one of those things of like, I think I wrote an article a while ago called like the problem, Residence Life's problem with bulletin boards. And, um, it's one of those things of like, what's the time to impact ratio on that? Like, when does
Hmm.
that diminish? If your RAs are spending 5 hours doing a really beautiful board, is that worth their time investment for the impact that it has?
Right.
But what if it was lower level? Would that make more sense? But also, kind
Right.
of like my tech background and my dissertation stuff, the splintering of communication channels with students.
Yeah.
Like, bulletin boards still have a place, I think, but they're one of many versus when I was in a
Right.
residence hall, there was no social media. We had landline phones. We did not have mobile phones or
Hmm.
texting or anything like we had internet, but like we're talking Napster era.
Right.
We had AIM era was well,
Mm.
it's a messenger. So the competition for student time and the ways that they get their information is just different now.
Yeah.
There's not like one channel where we can just be like, boom, it's the only game in
Right.
town. You have to look
Yeah.
here in order to know what's going on or other things, right? Like, I don't like, are they a learning tool? Are they still an effective learning tool? How much time should we spend on them? Should we care? Do we give them up? I mean, tell me, Dr. Long, what are we supposed to do about bulletin boards?
So what's really interesting is I actually worked with Dr. Daniel Beckton a few years before I did my dissertation, and we wrote an article. And his actual dissertation was like a photo view um,
Hmm.
of the bulletin boards in the residence halls. And then we actually had those students come into our staff meeting and talk about how they view the bulletin boards. So I think what we do wrong with bulletin boards is not that we do them. I think we do them and then we leave it there and don't do anything else with it. Whereas I think when we ask students about it and talk to them and engage with it and be like, oh, so we did this bulletin board on time management and it was like fantastic. Like, did you try any of these things? Like, is this the thing you're struggling with? Like, we don't connect that to anything else that we do or these conversations that we're having. And that's what Daniel and I found was like when you talked about it, they processed it on a different level and thought about it a lot deeper, and the learning was deeper because of that.
Hmm.
Um, and so I think that's sort of my stance on bulletin boards is
Yeah,
and you and I have talked a lot about intentional conversations as well, but what if we paired those two things?
right.
And or I mean, Roompact does great micro surveys. Use that. Like, what are
Use that
ways
as
that
a
we can emphasize those bulletin boards in other ways so that it's not just this thing that they pass by, twice a day and
Mhm.
starts looking just disappearing to them because they
Right.
see it all the time. Like, yeah.
Well, and I think that's one of the gifts that, regardless of whether a school uses a curricular approach or not, one of the concepts that I think I took away from curricular work is, you know, being more focused in your goals and your
Hmm.
outcomes for students. Because I think, when I was an RA, it was like, come up with a bulletin board,
Hmm.
whatever you want it to be. And when I was working at an institution and we were doing it, we were weaving the topics of the bulletin board so that it supported the program that was going on, which was
Hmm.
supporting the conversations that like it was all part of one
Hmm.
whole that we
Yeah.
were kind of weaving it. And I think that to me, I mean, I should have
Hmm.
done further research on it, but I mean, that to
Hmm.
me was giving it a bigger impact than a
Hmm.
drop in this, whatever the RA happens to be passionate about topic, which is probably good, but absent the other things going on, is
Hmm.
just not going to have the impact you want it to have.
Right, right. And I think in those cases, it's not worth the RA's time when they're just kind of one off, like, ooh, I find Earth Day really interesting. Let me do a bulletin board on Earth Day. But when you combine it with maybe an event that's about Earth Day, and then they're asked about like your sustainability practices in the hall, or you have like a contest on recycling or whatever that might be, and you're combining those things and having a little bit more focus on it, I think it's just so much more impactful. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, I mean, even like on the information front, it's like, well, you need to put it in the bulletin board, but you need to post it on Blue Sky and you need to do a TikTok
Mhm.
video of it and you need to do it because
Right.
everyone's on every channel and it's kind of like hitting in multi methods and things
Hmm.
like that.
Yeah.
Which kind of gets kind of so towards the last thing I wanted to hit on, which is this goes back to the design thinking a little bit, but the you talked about design versus
Mhm.
administrative centered design versus student centered design.
Yes.
And I think there's some themes in what we were talking about with the bulletin boards that are hit
Yeah.
on there. Can you tell people about that? Because I think that's probably one of the
Hmm.
most impactful kind of commentaries and findings that you came
Yeah.
away with, and that speaks to your unique strength with the design thinking mindset.
Right.
Help people.
Right. So it's this theme that was kind of woven throughout the dissertation of like administrator designs. It kind of like asks the question, what's easiest for us as educators to do? Like, is it, I do the program at 4 p.m. on a Tuesday because that's when it fits into my schedule versus
Hmm.
what is it that works for the students? And I think we talk about that a lot in timing sometimes, but we don't always talk about that a lot in the experience. Like talking about like conflict management, there we might find it easiest to help students learn about that through a workshop, but that's not, I think, the best way to learn about conflict management. You got to go through it, right? Like
Yeah.
you got to be in
Also not
conflict.
very sexy of a topic to try to get students to attend either.
No, no, they don't want to do that. They don't want to be in
No. I
conflict.
mean, I kind of don't want to do that, so I can't blame
Yeah, it's not
them.
my favorite, but you have to like, I think like in those kinds of, in that specific example, like sitting in the discomfort is part of the learning. And how do you get
Mhm.
comfortable sitting in that? And so I think thinking through what is the student already experiencing and how can we use those experiences to help the student learn is really an important thing and something that I don't think that we do enough is thinking about like because I get it like it's what is easiest for us is a lot of times the conversation but that's not the most effective conversation for our students. And I don't know if you caught this, Paul, but I rarely say, I try never to say we teach. I don't like that language because I think teaching and learning are two very separate things. Like I feel like I've done many a conduct case where my goal was to teach them not to drink alcohol in the residence hall or to drink alcohol responsibility. But what they took from it, what they learned from it is how not to get caught.
Yeah.
And so those are two very different things. And so I think when we focus on how are the students going to learn this as opposed to how are we going to teach this, it really shifts the perspective, and can help us come up with some really more effective programs or workshops or strategies or whatever you want to call that. Um,
Yeah.
and that was kind of another underlying mindset that I think the dissertation was built on, that maybe I didn't make super explicit in it, but that's,
Was it?
I think, really something that I think a lot about. And any of the, you can talk to people who worked with me for many years and they will tell you I hammer that in, is it is not, we are not teaching them, they are learning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think if even extend it to, because if people are thinking about how do I build a culture in our organization where that is valued, privileged,
Hmm.
et cetera, I think you also have to go in with that mindset with the training of your staff, right?
Hmm.
Like if I'm designing RA or whatever that position may be called or similar positions, training,
Hmm.
how does that training look? Like am I treating them as adult fellow learners?
Hmm.
And yeah, like there's administrative procedures we can do that, but like what are the other things that we can do to build skills and things
Yeah.
like that? I feel like I've been at an institution that pivoted the training a little bit to be more like that, and the student staff were the mindset shift was totally different
Yeah.
because it was less like the okay, now we're going to write an incident report. Da, 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 da.
Right.
We flipped it and said no, we're going to start with leadership skills and then we're going to do that stuff
Right.
last.
Right. And I
And I
think,
think like that sets the tone.
right. And I think one thing we do not talk about very much in student affairs is andragogy, and like what are the principles of andragogy and what do we get adults to learn. We're so weird with college students. Like sometimes we treat them like kids and sometimes we treat them like adults, and
Yeah,
like,
no, that's so true.
right, but especially with our student leaders, I think treating them as adults and bringing those principles of andragogy in is going to be really helpful for their learning. Like, and I say that also because learning is work. Like, I don't think we think of it as learn because we want to sit there and like, okay, we sit in this class and we like absorb the knowledge and like we just listen and it just like flows through us and then we know a thing. We want it to be that simple and it's just not. It is not clean. It is very messy and it takes work from both the facilitator, instructor, teacher, and the student. Like it
Right.
takes work to reflect on that bulletin board and say, okay, I saw this thing about um time management and it seems interesting. I want to learn how to do it. And then you actually have to like go and do it. And like we tend to do the easiest thing we can, right? Like humans, it's just kind of natural. We want the easiest path. It's like water, like it takes the easiest path it can, right? But that's part of the necessity of intentionality, is that if we're not intentional about it, we're not going to do it and they're not going to do it in a way that's actually beneficial to them and then they learn something.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. We're kind of nearing our time here. Is there anything that I didn't highlight that you're like, Paul, why did you not pick up on this? Or I feel like people need to know this that
Right. I
we should
think
mention.
one of the things I would really love our field to start doing is really explaining learning to students. I think people just think that like people know what learning is, right? Like it's a very simple definition in a lot of ways. But when I ask students, I very much ask them to define learning, and every one of them kind of struggled with this concept of like, and I started asking, it wasn't originally in my interview protocol, but I started asking, like, do you think about learning? Like, is that a thing that you think about? And they don't, with the exception of the student who was an education
I
major.
was going to say an education major.
She thought about learning a
Of course,
lot,
of course, of course they did.
right? But so I think being explicit about it goes back to like this expectations in the residence hall, right? Like we need to be explicit about what learning is and how it happens so that they can do it and recognize it and think about it and think about what are the methods. It's like that metacognition of like thinking about your thinking and thinking about your learning. And we just
Yeah.
don't do that enough. And I think that is a real area of growth for our field is thinking about. But we don't know. I don't know that all of the administrators or educators think about it
Yeah.
as much either, like what it is for themselves or for others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. Is it
Yeah.
just reflection?
Yeah.
Is it be creating reflective thinkers? Because I feel like when I was doing my master's degree in student affairs work, we had a lot of reflection. Like I feel
Hmm.
like my master's degree is in reflection.
Yes. I think it's a lot of reflection. I also, so that not to get into theory too much, because I know that's not everyone's favorite thing. But I use Baxter
Come be
McGold's,
nerdy with me. Be nerdy with
okay,
me,
yes.
please. Forget we have an
Baxter,
audience. This is for me.
I used Baxter McGold's epistemological reflection, and it was
Yeah.
really, it was interesting because if you've looked at that theory at all, it looks at both where the learning is coming from and then how they evaluate the learning. And so sometimes I think we need to explicitly say, you do not just learn in the classroom, you do not just learn from teachers, you learn outside of that. And knowledge is not a black or white thing. It is something that is you can evaluate and is in relation to other pieces of information or the context that you're in and all those kinds of things. And I think the more that we're explicit about that, the quicker they'll get to that kind of
Mm.
contextual knowledge and like understanding of learning is not sitting writing notes in a lecture hall. Like that's not really what it is. It is one way to do it, but it's not a good way necessarily. And so how are we really being like explicit about that?
On the tandem bicycle with them, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. For those of you not familiar, that's one of the analogies that Marcia Baxter McCullough uses. In fact, I have a video for Marcia's, what was it? Retirement anniversary, birthday. I don't remember what event. It was an important event.
Yeah.
Um, her students bought her a tandem bicycle. And I have a video of her riding it around in a parking lot at Miami University. So
That's so funny.
we'll leave you with that image.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for joining me, Erin. We mentioned a few things which we can put in the show notes for people if they want to dive deeper. But yeah, Erin's going to be with us for all of this year as a fellow. So you're going to see some additional blog posts and some webinars and other things. So not necessarily only on this topic, but also with the many
Mhm.
things of which Erin is master and scholar of. So we can look forward to that. But thanks for joining me, Erin, today, and we'll see the rest of you on the next episode of ResEd Chat.